Imagine someone rewriting the laws of physics right in front of you.
Right.
Like you drop an apple, and instead of falling, it just hovers there in midair.
That would definitely give you some vertigo.
Exactly. That profound sense of vertigo, that sudden, chilling realization that the fundamental rules you've relied on your entire life just, no longer apply. That is exactly what top military strategists and global economists are experiencing right now.
Yeah, but they aren't looking at physics, obviously. They're looking at the oceans.
Right.
Because the foundational rule of the global economy since the end of the Second World War has been freedom of navigation. It's this bedrock assumption that any vessel can ship civilian goods anywhere as long as it follows international law.
Which we all just take for granted.
Completely. But what we're witnessing today is this live, incredibly high-stakes experiment where that rule is actively being erased.
Wow. Well, welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to analyze a really detailed and frankly pretty sobering geopolitical brief from the Global Review.
Authored by Fried Novin.
Yep, dated today, March 31st, 2026. And the core of this document is a Bayesian analysis of the Sino-American conflict probabilities. All of this is set against the backdrop of the ongoing 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis.
And just to clarify that term for a second, a Bayesian analysis is essentially a method of continuously updating the odds of a specific event.
Like a major global conflict.
Exactly. You update the odds in real time as new evidence emerges. And what this brief does so brilliantly is take the chaos of a military crisis in the Middle East and reveal it for what it truly is.
A stress test.
Yes, a massive real-time stress test of the entire global order, specifically regarding China, Russia, and Taiwan.
So whether you're walking into a global market strategy meeting this morning, trying to map out long-term supply chain risks, or you're just insanely curious about where the world is heading, this deep dive is going to connect those dots for you.
We're going to link the explosion in global oil prices to autonomous drone swarms, fracturing alliances, and the shifting balance of power.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can even jump to the Pacific, we have to establish the immediate trigger, right? The spark in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, we need to start with the empirical timeline of the Hormuz crisis, because this didn't just emerge in a vacuum.
Right.
It was a rapid escalation stemming from February 28, 2026. That's when the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury.
Which was this unprecedented coordinated airstrike campaign targeting Iranian military facilities, leadership compounds, and, nuclear sites.
The sheer scale of those strikes was massive.
But it was the Iranian retaliation that fundamentally changed the board here.
Yeah.
Because they effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz.
Right, and to understand the gravity of that, you have to look at the geography. The strait is a navigational choke point. At its narrowest, it's barely 34 kilometers wide.
That's tiny.
It is, yet it handles roughly 20% of the entire global seaborne oil trade.
It's like the Strait of Hormuz is the world's most critical economic carotid artery, and someone just walked up and wrapped a tourniquet around it.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, the economic fallout described in this brief is hard to even wrap your head around. Brent crude shot up to $126 per barrel.
Yeah, and to even sail a commercial ship near the region, the war risk insurance spiked to between 3 and 5% of the vessel's total value per transit.
Which basically makes shipping financially impossible. Analysts estimate a $40 geopolitical risk premium was just slapped onto every single barrel of oil worldwide.
And the U.S. didn't just stand by. On March 19, they deployed their heaviest conventional weight.
Right, dropping those massive GBU-72 5,000-pound bunker buster munitions on Iranian coastal silos just to forcefully pry that strait open.
But despite the application of overwhelming conventional military force, the disruption persists.
Which is crazy.
The International Energy Agency actually characterizes this as the most acute supply disruption in the recorded history of global energy markets.
But wait, Iran has threatened to close the strait dozens of times over the last few decades. Every time tensions flare up, that threat gets thrown around. So how is this current closure fundamentally different from all those past rhetorical threats?
Well, that's the crucial distinction driving this entire geopolitical shift. Iran isn't attempting a blanket closure of the strait.
Because they know a total blockade unites the entire world against them.
Exactly. Instead, they're engaging in what game theorists call coercive bargaining. On March 26, Tehran made a monumental announcement.
The VIP list.
Right. They explicitly extended passage rights through the strait, but only to vessels from 5 specific nations: China, Russia, India, Iraq, and Pakistan.
So they are deliberately letting certain economies function while actively denying access to ships from the U.S., NATO, and Western allies.
Yes, they are operationalizing a post-Western regional order in real time. This is a discriminatory maritime system.
So they're taking a global energy commons and pricing access to it based strictly on geopolitical alignment rather than international
Yeah,
law,
precisely.
which naturally begs the question of mechanics. I mean, how is Iran actually enforcing this VIP list on the water while holding off a technologically superior U.S. Navy?
Yeah, the brief introduces a concept called the production attrition trap for that.
Right, so what is the actual math behind that trap?
The production attrition trap is essentially an economic bleed-out disguised as a military engagement. In a sustained, high-intensity conflict, U.S. naval forces rely on incredibly sophisticated, highly expensive interceptor missiles.
To defend themselves and clear the airspace.
Exactly. But Iran is flooding that airspace with low-cost, unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, and mass-produced cruise missiles.
Let me see if I have this dynamic right. It's like comparing the U.S. naval strategy to bringing a custom-made $1 million sniper rifle to fight a billion angry autonomous hornets.
That's spot on.
You might hit every single hornet you aim at, but you're going to run out of extremely expensive bullets long before they run out of hornets.
That is the exact mechanism of the trap. You're spending millions of dollars to defeat a threat that costs a few $1,000s to manufacture. Ouch.
Yeah. Over time, this systematically depletes the U.S. military's magazine depth, the physical inventory of interceptors they have stockpiled. Iran's multi-layered threat architecture is designed specifically to impose disproportionate, unsustainable costs on American forces.
So if the U.S. is burning through its defense budget shooting down cheap drones, someone else is watching that math very closely. The brief points out that the ultimate beneficiary of this dynamic isn't actually Iran.
No, it's China.
Right.
And the production scales are staggering when you lay them side by side. The U.S. procured roughly 50,000 UAVs in 2025. China, conversely, launched a program to field 1 million tactical UAVs by 2026.
Wait, really? How do you even manufacture 1 million military-grade drones in a single year?
Through a doctrine known as civil-military fusion, Chinese manufacturers already control between 70 and 90% of the global commercial drone market.
Right, like all the drones you buy at the electronics store.
Exactly. The state apparatus just seamlessly maps that massive commercial dominance directly onto its military production capacity. And the technology they're fielding sounds like something out of a dystopian sci-fi novel. The brief details an intelligentized warfare system called Atlas, which Chinese state media demonstrated on March 25.
Yeah, that system is wild. A single command vehicle can simultaneously control up to 96 drones in a synchronized swarm.
And they use embedded artificial intelligence to avoid mid-air collisions. Plus, crucially, they incorporate autonomous anti-jamming algorithms.
Which is the nightmare scenario for traditional air defense. Historically, if you severed the communication link between a drone swarm and its human operator, the swarm just fell apart.
But autonomous algorithms mean these machines can complete their attack protocols even in a completely denied electromagnetic environment.
Exactly. And then there's the delivery method. In December 2025, China flew a drone carrier mothership called the Jiushin.
A drone aircraft carrier.
Basically, it weighs 16 tons and has a range of 7,000 kilometers. It is literally designed to haul massive swarms of these smaller autonomous drones across oceans and deploy them right on a target's doorstep.
Okay, but I have to push back here. Surely the U.S. Navy, with its advanced Aegis combat systems and sheer, overwhelming firepower, still outmatches these drone swarms in a direct fight, right?
What's fascinating here is that Beijing isn't questioning American firepower. They are calculating American endurance.
Ah, the magazine depth.
Right. As we established with the attrition trap, the U.S. has a finite supply of those high-end interceptors. But beyond the math of the munitions, China is using the Middle East as a live laboratory.
They are carefully watching the U.S. exhaust its specific resources halfway across the world.
Exactly. By observing how the U.S. Navy responds to Iranian drone swarms, Beijing maps out American defensive doctrine, their radar sequencing, their tactical response times, and the true depth of their magazines.
That real-world operational intelligence is invaluable for planning any future contingency in the Pacific.
It absolutely is.
Now, if the U.S. is facing that kind of mathematical nightmare and resource drain, you would expect them to lean heavily on their allies, especially since Europe relies heavily on the oil flowing through Hormuz.
You would think so.
But the brief details A massive, very public transatlantic fracture that opened up right in the middle of this crisis.
The diplomatic rupture within NATO is perhaps the most immediately consequential fallout detailed in the brief. On March 15, President Trump effectively demanded that allied nations step up and militarily handle the passage through the strait.
Arguing the European economies are the primary beneficiaries of that security.
Right.
And the European allies flat out refused. Germany's defense minister Boris Pistorius went on record stating, "This is not our war."
And the EU's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas, pointed out there was absolutely no appetite among member states to join a U.S.-led kinetic fight.
Which led to President Trump escalating the rhetoric, labeling NATO a paper tiger, calling the allies cowards, and warning of a very dark future for the alliance if burden sharing didn't happen immediately.
Yeah, they eventually reached a heavily conditioned compromise where 22 nations agreed to assist.
But only if a truce is established first, right?
Yeah.
And operations are run under a broad multilateral coalition.
Putting process ahead of operations.
Right. So is this just standard, cyclical, political bickering between the U.S. and Europe about defense spending, or is this a permanent crack in the foundation of NATO?
The analysis in the brief treats this as a structural rupture. It goes far deeper than typical burden-sharing disputes.
How so?
Well, if we look at this impartially, both sides have distinct, deeply entrenched logics. From the perspective of the U.S. administration, American forces are bearing the immense cost and risk of securing a global economic artery.
So they feel it's unreasonable for the allies who consume that energy to refuse participation.
Exactly.
And the European logic.
The European perspective is rooted in a profound anxiety about unilateral American action. They are terrified of being dragged into an escalating conflict in the Middle East without any prior strategic consultation.
I see.
There's a fear that the U.S. might suddenly declare its narrow military objectives met and withdraw, leaving under-equipped European navies to indefinitely police a highly hostile militarized strait.
Wow. And while the West is having this very public family feud, Russia is quietly reaping a massive windfall.
Huge. As a major non-Gulf hydrocarbon exporter, Russia is the immediate economic beneficiary of a disrupted Hormuz.
Right, because when oil hits $126 a barrel, Moscow experiences an incredible surge in revenue.
Which flows directly into funding its ongoing war effort in Ukraine.
But the brief points out that it isn't just an economic victory for Moscow, it's an ideological one.
Definitely. The events in the Gulf provide doctrinal validation for Russia.
Because the systematic targeting of energy infrastructure to inflict economic pain and erode a population's political will, that's the exact playbook Russia has utilized in Ukraine.
Exactly. Furthermore, Moscow and Beijing are jointly capitalizing on the chaos to reshape the global narrative.
Yeah, they convened an emergency UN Security Council session to frame U.S. and Israeli military responses as lawlessness.
They're aggressively positioning themselves to the global south as the true defenders of a stable, multipolar international order.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. With the U.S. distracted, its naval magazines depleting, and its crucial alliances fracturing, we finally turn to the ultimate global flashpoint, Taiwan.
Right.
The brief updates the Bayesian probability of a major conflict, and the numbers are startling.
In 2024, the baseline probability of a major Chinese strategic move on Taiwan was estimated at roughly 6%.
Okay.
But based on the cascading effects of the Hormuz crisis, this March 31st, 2026, brief updates that probability to between 22 and 25% over the next 12 months.
Wow. A nearly four-fold increase in the likelihood of a move on Taiwan.
Yeah, and the brief points out that China isn't just watching. They are actively preparing their domestic resilience.
Right. They have rapidly amassed a 1.2 billion barrel strategic petroleum reserve, which is a clear buffer against future sanctions or energy blockades.
They also increased their 2026 defense budget by 7% to $278 billion.
And the operational tempo is escalating, right? There were over 5,700 PLA air incursions around Taiwan in 2025 alone.
It's massive. And if you game this out, the brief presents several scenarios for how Beijing might leverage this strategic window.
Let's hear them.
Scenario A, which carries a 55% probability, is the attrition trap scenario. This assumes China will maintain a posture of strategic patience, allowing the U.S. to sink deeper into the Middle Eastern quagmire and hollow out its own military readiness.
Okay, and scenario B.
Scenario B, assigned a 30% probability, involves geoeconomic coercion. This is where China actively uses that selective maritime passage regime we discussed, leveraging their VIP access in the Gulf to pressure other nations into a post-dollar Sino-centric economic order.
Right. But looking at scenario A, letting the U.S. bleed itself dry, I have to ask.
Yeah.
Is China actively orchestrating this Gulf crisis behind the scenes to create this perfect storm? Or are they just opportunistically sitting back eating popcorn while the U.S. exhausts itself?
The verified intelligence cited in the brief strongly suggests it's the latter. Beijing has provided no verified material military support to Iran during this specific crisis.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they have explicitly denied providing the anti-ship cruise missiles being used in the Strait. China is executing extreme strategic patience.
So they are purposefully stepping aside and letting the U.S. burn its own strategic bandwidth.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author suggests an implicit deal is taking shape globally.
What kind of deal?
Well, China maintains a low profile regarding Iran, issuing only vague general calls for de-escalation while quietly securing their own preferential transit rights for oil. In exchange for this non-interference, Beijing expects Washington to acknowledge the limits of Taiwan's independence.
Ah. The brief even highlights a report suggesting that a delayed state visit between U.S. and Chinese leadership might be implicitly tied to a delay in U.S. arms sales to Taiwan.
Right. It's a massive, unspoken geopolitical trade-off happening right under the surface.
Which brings us to the core synthesis of Fareed Novin's analysis. The 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis is not merely a regional conflict over a narrow body of water.
No, it is a dress rehearsal for displacing American and NATO primacy globally.
A dress rehearsal.
Yeah.
That's a chilling thought.
Because for both Beijing and Moscow, a global security architecture led by the U.S. and NATO is fundamentally incompatible with their vision of a multipolar world. They are actively constructing an alternative international order.
And they're building it through non-dollar trade networks, massive industrial investments in autonomous weaponry, and perhaps most effectively, through the selective access to vital global resources.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Wait, no, I already said that. So what does this all mean for you?
Yeah, that's the real question.
We started this deep dive talking about rewriting the fundamental rules of the world. And the brief leaves us with a truly profound, unsettling implication about how trade works. It details how Iran, right now, is pricing access to a global energy commons based purely on geopolitical alignment.
Abandoning the universal maritime rights we've just, taken for granted.
Right.
It is a direct challenge to the very foundation of the post-World War II liberal international economic order.
So here's a thought for you to mull over as you watch the news out of the Gulf over the next few weeks. If this concept of selective maritime access works, if it becomes the new accepted global standard, what happens when it isn't just applied to oil in the Middle East?
Right, what's next?
Exactly. What happens when that exact same logic is applied to the microchips passing through the South China Sea, or the global food supply, or just everyday consumer goods?
Does this mark the definitive end of freedom of navigation, the singular concept that has kept global trade flowing for 80 years?
Are we actively witnessing the birth of a permanently segregated global economy?
It raises an important question that every policymaker and business leader really must confront. Has the unified, frictionless global market we've known already fractured into heavily guarded, exclusive spheres of influence?
It is a heavy question, and the answer is being decided on the water right now. Keep an eye on how these alliances bend or break in the coming days. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Global Review. We'll see you next time.